everybody. Welcome back. Joe here, joined by Steve Rio. How are you today?
Good, man. How are you doing?
Doing lovely. Beautiful, cold, slightly snowy day here in Colorado. So I'm excited to chat with you again. Last time we chatted, we had a Instagram live, and that was really fun. Got to know you a little bit better, and you come with a really great reputation. Alex Enchin is always talking you up. And I think he twisted my arm enough to talk to you. So I'm excited about that. So here we are. So Steve, what is your organization, just so people know?
Yeah, my wife and I are co-founders of Enfold, and that's Enfold, Enfold Institute. You can find us at enfold.org.
Great. And you're operating in British Columbia?
We're in BC, yeah. Just outside. We're on a small island just outside of Vancouver.
Great. And what kind of work do you do?
I'd say that we're building, well, I think three things: coaching, community, and experiences focused around the efforts of healing and transformation. So some of our clients are coming to us for fairly deep healing work around trauma and basically moving from a very stuck place or kind of getting out of moving through some serious work. Others are coming for more transformative, expansive work. And I think often those two overlap, but I think that that's the core work we do. And we do it in three formats. We're building a community and really trying to create connection between the people that come to see us so that they have this ecosystem and fabric of support, which I think is so important. We do a lot of ongoing coaching work. So a lot of our work is on an annual basis or on a semi-annual basis, working in 6-month increments. So we can really do deep dive work with people. And then we offer a few different types of intensive experiences, essentially focus primarily with 5-MeO DMT, but a few other substances as well.
That's amazing. And what is it about British Columbia that allows you to operate?
Canada is an interesting space in general. Canada, so 5-MeO DMT is unregulated here, where it is regulated in the United States. It's also unregulated in Mexico. So technically, it's basically a legal substance. There's a bit of gray zone because there's no there's certain types of protections or licensing that don't exist, but we are able to work legally with that. So what that means is that we can secure our substance that we work with directly from labs, and so we can have a really clear chain of custody with the substances we use. And basically, primarily, we work with three substances, all of which are unregulated in Canada. And I think BC in particular has always had an interesting progressive approach to substances and to this kind of area. So it feels like a fairly safe environment to work. I'd also just say that BC, there's something about BC that is just phenomenally beautiful, and the natural surroundings that we're in, the ocean, the mountains, the forests, there's something deeply rooting about being here in BC. And my wife and I, it's very expensive to live here, and we've thought many times about moving somewhere that might be a little bit more affordable. But every time we look around, we just think, man, this is such a magical, potent spot in the world to be. So that's what keeps us here.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
I've only been to your city once, Vancouver specifically. I haven't been to your island, I'm sure, but it's a magical place, and I hope to come a bunch of times. I'll be almost there in a few weeks. I'll be in Bellingham, right over the border.
Okay,
so it should be interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to kind of dig in. Like, we'll do the biggest question first. Like, why 5-MeO DMT?
Yeah, 5-MeO DMT arrived in our lives a number of years ago, and I would say that there's sort of two answers to the question. The one part is that our first experience with 5-MeO DMT really felt like for me personally, it felt like there was a before me and an after me. It felt like the most penetrating psychedelic experience of my life, and I had done a lot of different things, and so it felt just truly exceptional in its qualities, and it's very unique from other psychedelics, and I'm sure we'll get into that a bit. But there was just something about it that it it confirmed something for me, and it opened up a process for me that, like I say, was a before and after moment in my life. And I can really only think of a few of those moments in my life, and that was one of them. I'd say the second piece of it was that as we started looking around at the landscape of 5-MeO-DMT, it really didn't feel like there was a lot. There was a few folks we found that are deep in the underground, that are doing really profound work, but a lot of the primary actors that you could find on the internet or seek out, it just felt like there was a lot missing in terms of safety, in terms of process, in terms of just general capacity to think about how to work with this medicine, and felt like there was both an opportunity and a need for that to happen. So for the first number of years, we worked underground and just developed process and protocol, and really word of mouth, and it was very successful. We were doing fine. Last year, we decided to become much more public, and mainly for the factor of realizing that we needed to start discussing what standards look like for this medicine, and discussing these different aspects of what is safety, what does effectiveness actually look like with 5-MeO-DMT, what's the right context container, and all of that. So that's been our process with 5-MeO. I think the last thing I just say is that um, our orientation to psychedelics comes from our background in mindfulness, in Buddhism, in just really like a very simple idea of what spirituality means. And we're not really into a lot of the shamanic aspects so much. Participating in a really incredible shamanic ceremony is an amazing experience, and there's nothing right or wrong about any of it. But for us, a very direct experience with spirituality, and a very clear one, was important. And 5-MeO felt like it offered that very direct experience. There's not a lot of visuals. There's not a lot of fireworks. It's really a very somatic experience. It just brings you into the present moment in a way that I don't know any other medicine can do. So it just felt like it also resonated with our perspective and our values and our kind of context that we came with.
So I was just recently recording with I think he would call himself a historian of science. He's working on a PhD in the history of science, specifically in psychedelics, out of France. And I didn't realize this, but France is apparently wildly secular. And they were watching some sessions out of Hopkins where some stuff was like a little triggering for them. Like I think it was a video of Bill Richards holding up a photo of the patient was a lady, her husband, and saying, "Your husband is God," to her multiple times. Super out of context, I might add. Super out of context. Sure. We don't know the whole story, etc. But like on the surface, that doesn't look very good. And like that really freaked them out about how intense some of our facilities are inserting religion. That said, like my critique, pushback on them was like, Buddhism in America can often be quite atheistic. It can be like a really pragmatic, almost materialist practice. And it's hard to say, like, like Tibetan Buddhism looks almost like it's got so much in there. It's almost like the Catholic Church. It's just got so many layers and so many levels. And it's fascinating and amazing, but it's also like complicated and so much with it. Like how do you like to think about, Buddhism in your practice?
Yeah, I think that's really important to parse out, because we don't consider ourselves religious Buddhists, and frankly, all the fanfare and all the layers of hierarchy and that's actually the part that we want to strip away from these experiences entirely. Like for us, it's really about Buddhist principles. I think Buddhist philosophy and Buddhist principles, there's incredible depth there in understanding yourself, understanding the illusion of self, understanding the mind. I think there's like profound the practice of non-attachment, these kind of things. That's where we draw from. In terms of being, we're not specifically one strain of Buddhism or any of that. I think we also draw from a lot of other wisdom traditions and science as well. So yeah, I think that's important to distinguish, because I think inserting any type of dogma is not really helpful in taking people through a psychedelic experience. I think there's some core basic principles around love, around compassion, around forgiveness that I think everyone can agree with. But I think beyond that, it's important for everybody to be able to contextualize their experience in the framing that feels right to them. So if we work with a Muslim, then let's sing some prayers to Allah. Like if that's what works for you, let's do that. If you are Christian, then let's talk about Jesus. So let's talk about the framing of Jesus. If that's helpful to you in your framing, we're essentially like very open in that way. To us, we try and create the clearest and simplest container for spirituality that allows for the depth of spirituality, but doesn't necessarily try and say spirituality is one thing or another, because frankly, that's a very personal choice.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Yeah, it's such a complicated topic, like, but there's so much depth and value there if we can engage with it properly. I think that's why we're in our scene. We should really focus on cultural competency. Like, do we know enough to work with this population or that population, or how could we learn enough to,
Yes.
if we're going to serve them? And I thankfully I have a deep religious background where I've studied a lot of world religions for a long time, and I have that I can bring to the table, which is nice. And I'm not trying to be like pushy with any of it, because
Right.
I don't exactly know anything that I believe either. So, and like, I know the stories, but
Yeah.
and how to work with it a little bit. But yeah, I think treating it as like these cultures have stories is a fun way to do that. And like, where are these stories helpful for this person?
That's right. There's stories, there's allegories, and frankly, I think when you look at religion, when you boil them down, it always comes back to the same core principles, just wrapped in different clothing, really.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, religion has been so divisive in our society, and used as a tool of control so often, that this idea of even the word God is very triggering to so many people. And so again, like when you work with 5-MeO, there is an aspect of this experience that is undeniably linked to, for most people that have it, there's some experience of connection with all, connection with one, connection with God, connection with spirit. I don't really care at all about the language. But I think it's important to help people understand that there's something happened there, and to help them find their own context for what that means, and their own context for how it fits into the narrative of their story of who they are and what their life is about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cool. So I think that's all really, really valuable for folks. Like, I remember this critique Ben Sessa would throw out often. If you're familiar with Ben, he's like, mortally offended by the concept of having like Buddha statues or like chakras all over the walls. Like, when somebody comes in, I'm like, I get it, man. But also, there's some people that are into that. And there would be, and he was all about like, how do we customize the room for people? And I think I even brought this up last time we chatted, maybe like putting up Manchester United stuff on the walls for the people who are just like, that's their God. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I love that. I love that. In fact, like in our ceremony space, we have nothing, and our entire space, all of our spaces are clear of any religious ideology or idols, or imagery. For that exact reason, we think of our ceremony space as a blank canvas for your spiritual experience, and that feels really important. I think this work is deeply spiritual. That's the core framing of the work we do. However, it's not rooted in any one space, and again, it's for each person to decide what that means.
100%. So let's dig in a little bit more on 5-MeO. So you said that you're working with the lab, and you talked about chain of custody, which, to your credit, Steve, how many people do you know talk about their chain of custody for their substances?
I don't think anybody has the potential. Like, it's very hard for people to. Yeah.
Right. It really is. It's like developing that relationship with a manufacturer, like ensuring trust and like having that safety is like a big deal. So good on you for that. And why did you choose synthetic over like toad derived 5-MeO DMT?
Yeah, I think there's are two core reasons. The one that people talk about the most is just the fact that these the, these toads. So first of all, if you're not familiar, there's one toad in the world where 5-MeO-DMT is found in high enough concentration. It's the Sonoran Desert toad, Bufo alvarius. This is in the Sonoran Desert, which is kind of in the Arizona-Mexico border region. And there was a time back in the 70s, and I'm sure for a very long time before that, where these toads were everywhere. There's Andrew Weil tells these stories about, because he used to live in that region, about the toads being in his pool and trying to get in his all over his backyard, thousands of them, and they were feeling like an invasive species almost. There's so many of them, and since the proliferation of information about 5-MeO-DMT and the toad, which really only became decently well known in the 80s, these toads have quickly become close to extinct. And the whole region is in turmoil because of people coming to harvest toads. There's cartel activity. So I think there's human safety risks. I think there's animal safety risks. And once you work with synthetic, you realize that there's so little difference between Bufo alvarius and synthetic that it makes no sense to be working on healing, transformation, and consciousness expansion at the expense of this beautiful animal. So that's the core conservation reason, and just I feel like maybe an ethical reason. The other one though is safety, and for us, dosing, because this medicine is the strongest psychedelic on the planet, because we're working in such specific dosing protocols. Like, we've taken great lengths to get very exacting in our measurements. You just can't do that with the toad venom. Toad venom has anywhere from 15 to 30% 5-MeO-DMT content in it. So if you imagine like one flake of Bufo to the next, you could have double the amount of 5-MeO in one flake or the next. So that's a huge variance that can lead to very unpredictable, potentially unsafe, but also just potentially unuseful results when smoking Bufo. So when we work with synthetic, we get an absolutely pure substance. Again, like, we've worked very carefully with who we source our 5-MeO-DMT from, so we get a very pure substance. And we can be very, very specific in terms of our dosing. So when we say 2 milligrams, we know it's 2 milligrams. And when we say 12, we know it's 12. Because I think when you look at the anecdotal experiences of people that have had really adverse effects, that I think the two major things is setting, and support. Like, what does aftercare and support look like? But two, a lot of people are being dosed way too aggressively. Like, a lot of the Mexican shamans, and I'm not just calling out, Mexican shamans, but this lineage of type of practice with 5-MeO, which is to load a pipe with as much 5-MeO as you can, to inhale as much as you can. That can lead to some really adverse effects where people experience, serious lack of sleep that can go on for weeks or months, like serious nervous system twitches and other kind of results when people are dosed too high. So I think dosing effectively is a really critical aspect of safety and harm reduction.
Mm-hmm. Wholeheartedly agree there. I recall, Andy Weil talking to me about that. Like, the toads are just jumping into his house. It's certainly not happening anymore. Like, what really needs to happen, and there was some activity in the 5 space. I think Rack Rousum was like leading up this organization that was going to fund like a toad conservation study. But I was like, you guys are all like toad people. Like, I don't, like, it needs to be kind of run by unbiased, like, university people if we're going to be doing that. And I couldn't buy it. But it was a good first effort. I don't know where it went, but it really needs to happen, that we need a good survey. Robert Villa from the Tucson Herpetological Society has been doing some really, really great work on toad populations. And I think just published a academic paper finally that we can cite, that even it talks about all of these like sub areas of the issue in a published format that scientists will believe finally.
Yeah, interesting. It's, if you go on the toad forums on Reddit and whatnot, there's all these people showing photos of the toads they've captured and they're keeping in their bathtub or aquariums and stuff, and it's just kind of nasty, man. Like, I think we got to stop promoting the idea that toad venom is honestly any different than synthetic. There's a whole bunch of other alkaloids, and that's true, but like, we've been in chemistry labs showing the results when you burn, like especially when you vaporize the toad venom, what is left is essentially pure 5-MeO and like very small traces of bufotenine. But everything else, all the other alkaloids burn off anyway. So we're really we're not talking about any sort of subjective difference. There's definitely an ideological difference for the folks that are obsessed with toad, and naturally a lot of people gravitate towards natural or organic substances. So I understand that natural impulse. I just think in this case it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, agreed. And we shouldn't be driving things to extinction. We published an article a while ago, like, can 5-MeO DMT cure narcissism? And that was a clickbait title, where we wanted people to see, oh no, it's actually super narcissistic to be smoking this toad. And we shouldn't be doing that. So that was a big one. One of our advisors, Malin Utog, she was a published author on a study that compared the subjective effects of toad-derived 5-MeO DMT and synthetic, and found that there was no subjective difference. And this is a published paper, so like people should check that out. And we've done some media work with her as well. So I'm glad we're on the same page on this one, and thanks for staying on the right side of this issue. What I have found interesting is, a lot of people, like I think some of the gnarlier folks in the space have helped this myth, but bringing up that toad-derived 5 has been used for thousands of years, which there's zero anthropological evidence to support that. But what I've slightly relaxed on is these tribal groups in the Mexican American border region have taken this up as a new sacrament, and they've built it into their existing religious frameworks, which I'm not going to say that I have any right to critique that. But I think that's a really interesting use case, but I also don't think it should get super big. I think that should be really like a discrete, small scale thing if possible.
Yeah, and I don't see why they couldn't use the synthetic as well and honor the animals, and maybe actually just work on conservation of the animals in their region as well. Like that'd be great.
I'd believe more in that, but yeah. Yeah. And then there's been some bad actors in the space too. Like, I've been hearing about physical abuse, rape. I've been hearing about people aspirating, like, you're kind of a little bit not with your body for a minute. So to get people to stand up or take a deep breath or something, they'll actually dump a bunch of water in their mouths or use a taser. And I've actually seen on video the water actually entering people's lungs, which could lead to a really intense lung infection. Not good. So, these people somehow still have somehow a deep following in the space, despite their use of electrical kind of stim devices. They say they're really subtle devices, but I'll buy one and test it to see if it's subtle. I just need to know what model it is. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I don't think that's a great move. Or forcing people to stand up. If you watch the Hamilton Morris 5 episode that he did first, that Vice butchered, by the way. He wanted toad conservation baked in hardcore, but Vice decided to go in a very different direction and hype the toad. And he then redid the episode later with a more conservation eye, which is important, I think. So, standing up, theoretically okay on psychedelics at high dose with 5-MeO DMT. Like, how are you going to stand? And then you put people at risk of a head or neck injury or a broken hip. Like in that video, he was having people in the middle of a cold mountain stream, rocks everywhere. It's like,
yeah,
no.
No. When we first started working with this medicine personally, and then bringing it into our practice, there was nothing on the internet besides some of those videos. Like, that was really all you could find, was these videos of Octavio, who's finally, I think, largely been just exposed for what he is. But of course, cults are cults, and people get into extreme characters. But generally, I think people understand who that guy is now. But yeah, that was all you could find. And that was also part of it, was like, what is, because I'm also a writer and a content builder and a program designer, and I think about education, and I love creating So that's a lot of what we're doing as well, is like, what is the proper way to talk about this medicine, because it's such a new, because there is no lineage, like you mentioned just now, that really this is like a very unique medicine in the fact that we've only been using it for the last 50 years ish, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that there is no known lineage of it. So what, like, there is this a bit of a blank canvas there. And the first public stuff was very sensational. When you watch somebody pouring water down somebody's nose or dropping them into a river, like, it makes for good TV. And unfortunately, and we were talking about this a bit off camera, but like Vice just put out another 20+ minute mini documentary on 5-MeO DMT and Tulum, and it's just such a bad look for psychedelics in general, but particularly for this medicine. It's showing a whole bunch of what we call drive-by-5 providers. And when we say drive-by-5, we just mean you show up somewhere, you smoke 5, you leave, right? Or they show up, they smoke, they give you the pipe, and then they're gone an hour or two later. We refer to that as drive-by-5, just because, like, we've just had too many people we've talked to or reach out to us who have had serious dysregulating experiences and had no support through that process. But anyway, Vice just shows another 25 minutes of Tulum and people smoking 5-MeO DMT on a beach with a group, with no context, with no preparation, with no integration. They're showing the kind of worst aspects of this medicine, and they did an okay job at balancing the story. But it's still like, I for us, we just feel like it's part of our core mission as Enfold to create media, to influence culture, to affect the standards and the way in which we think about this medicine. So that's just been a big thing that we think about all the time. And I think moving beyond the bad actors, like, there's these really bad actors that are sensational and their stories are just kind of wild. Like, when you hear them, you viscerally know, like, that doesn't make sense. But there's also just a lot happening in this space that feels really, I don't know what word to use, but it just doesn't feel safe. Let's just leave it there. A lot of people, because I think people think that 5-MeO, on the one hand, serving 5-MeO feels easy, and I'm using air brackets if you can't see, but easy in the sense that you don't have to sit with somebody for 5 or 8 hours. Like, it's this very fast experience, and it's a very evangelical experience that you want to share. You naturally want to share with others. And so there's a ton of people serving this medicine that just do not have the experience, do not have the life experience, do not have the spiritual context or training, or psychological context or training, all of the core aspects you need. And so it's a bit of the Wild West out there right now.
Yeah, very much so, I think. So yeah, people should be very careful, just because
Yes.
you get 1 or 2 positive reviews on somebody. Like, that's not, I don't think, enough. I think you really want to go a little further. Probably very disparate people, and maybe like 5+ testimonies from different people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, obviously prep is super important. How do you guys approach preparation?
Well, I think preparation starts with, when people come to us, it starts with screening. So the first thing we do is, make sure that someone is in the right place in their life for this experience, has had the right previous experience with self-exploration or spiritual work or therapy work, or there's a lot of different ways people can be prepared for this experience. It doesn't necessarily mean doing a ton of psychedelics. It could be they've done a lot of therapy work to really unpack their personality and their history, or they've done a lot of spiritual work in their faith, or other ways, right? But the first thing is to just really make sure that someone is in the right place for this experience, meaning mostly that they've done enough prerequisite work for an intervention of this scale, and that they have enough stability in their life to handle the dysregulation that comes with this medicine. Because what we're really doing for 3 days is there's an aspect of it that's very dysregulating. And that's why we do it over multiple days. So that's the first step. And I'd say, like, we we screen out at least 1 in 5, if not more, folks that approach us to seek out this work. And then there's a series of content. There's basically, we have a series of videos that explain every aspect around this content. So there's up to 3 hours of content. If people want to take in all of it, the minimum, like the required amount is there's 45 minutes of videos that people need to watch. It's required. We do a one-on-one prep call. We do before that prep call, we do an intake that takes the person about an hour and a half to complete. So we have a full download of their history, which is also really useful for them to unpack different aspects of their timeline and what's impacted them. So we take them through that intake form. We do a one-on-one call. We do a group call where everyone meets everyone ahead of the retreat. And then we have a prep program, which is a 2-week program of daily reflections, introductions to meditations, breath work, basically different mindfulness and somatic practices to help them start grounding into the experience, and daily reflections and journaling to help them start cultivating intention, cultivating purpose for their experience with us. And then for a lot of our clients, though, these days, we're working in more lengthy containers where I've already done 3 months of coaching with them before they come to see us. So that's another way that works. But if you're coming to one of our more standard retreats, what I just described is the core prerequisite for showing up.
Yeah. I like that. You said a lot of things that are super in alignment for us. Like we always say, like, do you actually have space to be dysregulated for a little bit of time or a lot of time? Like, what is your window here? And this is why it's always like a little funky when I see people talking about like, let's give homeless people psychedelics. It's like, yeah, kind of, but also like they need a better container than what they have. Like they don't really have that feeling of safety that can be like worked with. And yeah, it's a big one. And I'm glad you're operating that way. It's really helpful to hear. So, you know, your background with like mindfulness, meditation, Buddhism, like I've only been on like one Vipassana retreat. It was great, but it was also paired with holotropic breath work, which is like, let's go really loud and let's get really quiet and figure out how loud we are inside. Right. Like, it's pretty fascinating. But I think there's, you know, I've spent a lot of time in retreats, so I kind of like understand how that kind of journey goes for a lot of folks when they come to a place like this. Maybe I don't get it for one-on-one work as much, but I think, you know, for me, the goal is to move people towards some sort of group because it's a lot more affordable and practical, accessible. But yeah, like how do you like to think about group versus individual work?
Yeah, I think what you just said is generally right. The more people can open up in a group setting, I think that's an incredibly healing practice to be able to be vulnerable, to be able to be heard, to hear other people's stories and realize you're not alone. To hear yourself and others is really powerful. I think ultimately the deepest healing does happen in community, and so we really lean towards that as well. We also do private work, and I think there's a time and a place for it. And of course, like you said, there's a access factor that some people can afford it. It's interesting though, some people that can afford it, we still say like, you know, you could pay us a lot more money and come see us privately. But we would still recommend you seek out a group experience if you can. And I think, but there is something we can do privately with someone. So when somebody comes to see us on their own or as a couple, and they come for 3 days, and we're able to it's basically my wife and I plus a third co-facilitator and support person, entirely focused on one person or two people. The depth that you can get is pretty powerful. And but we always encourage those people to come back to a group retreat at some point just to experience what it means to open yourself up in groups. And in fact, basically once people have certain levels of experience, the way we hold ceremony starts to change. Like when you come to our standard retreat, like our Awakening to Life, which is a 3-night experience. and soon to be in the fall, it will be a longer experience. But right now, it's a 3-night experience. When you come to that, it's a group retreat, and most activities are done in a group, but the ceremony itself is done privately. So 5-MeO, because it's so intense, the first time somebody has this experience, and sometimes that we'll do that privately. The rest of the experience will be done in a group setting. Once people have more experience with this medicine and feel more comfortable, then we'll actually open up to where it's a very small group, but we'll do group setting for the medicine experience as well. And there's something very profound about opening yourself up and releasing energy in a group setting. But I don't think that's for everybody right off the bat. I think there's a chance of traumatizing people. There's a chance of shutting down the person or the ego, kind of clenching up and not being able to release in the way we hope in a group setting at the start. So we kind of blend group and private work when you're at our group retreats generally. That was kind of a convoluted answer, but hopefully that made some sense.
Yeah, totally. I think that's great.
Yeah.
And how do you have in the notes you sent me yesterday something about the middle way for psychedelics, and I think that's a good concept. And it's kind of like core in the post-Esalen kind of transpersonal traditions, is finding some sort of middle path. And how do you all like to talk about the middle path of psychedelics?
Yeah, the middle path or the middle way to us, it just means that, like, I think right now the landscape is a bit polarized. There's this hyper medicalized view of psychedelics, and I think a lot of that is stripping away a lot of the spiritual component of what these experiences are. And they're very medical. They're very clinical. It's like, oh, this will heal your depression or something like that. Right. That's one end of the spectrum. I think the other end of the spectrum is this heavily shamanic type, view of psychedelics, which like the kind of ayahuasca traditions, which have sort of seeped into a lot of the other medicines. And there's this very shamanic practice, which in many ways, shamanism is just another word for religion. Like, it's just another way of so I think there's this kind of, and I think in both of those cases, there's something missing. And so for us, the middle path is, how do we blend spirituality with the best that science has to offer and modern techniques of therapy and coaching, and some of those sensibilities with the best sensibilities from wisdom traditions and the core ideas and practices from wisdom traditions? And how do you blend those to create something that is less polarized in either direction, that's more accessible, and that's that doesn't try and take one route of beliefs at the expense of all the other ideas and thoughts that are out there. So that for us feels really important because I think we're in a very highly polarized time in general, where people seem to jump to one extreme or the other. For us, it's like there's a lot down the middle. I think there's some really powerful techniques: EMDR, IFS, attachment-based theory, attachment-based therapy. Coaching is really powerful. There's some really beautiful practices that are emerging from the modern era of psychology and somatic therapies. And these are all really important aspects of integration and preparation and the process itself. So I think those are really important to include. But I think that we also need to layer in a level of spirituality, of understanding that this isn't just about fixing something in our life or some personality system glitch, or it's not just healing trauma. There's something about connection, about reaching a deeper sense of meaning and purpose, about a greater sense of awareness of the bigger picture of our life. And so we like to try and look at a way to combine those two. So that's what we mean by the middle way.
I love that. Yeah, I saw some critiques recently about I don't really know what to make of this yet, but people were critiquing Shipibo shamans for not being somatically informed. I'm like, I don't. It's awkward, right? Because why? How would they be? Like, assuming that they should have Western training just seems a little far out to me. and like consumers expecting that kind of thing it's also a little bonkers to me. It seems really colonial, and
Yeah.
just be aware of what kind of container you're going in, I think, is the trick here.
That's super important. Like we're at such an early stage where people don't know what they're signing up for. Like, so I talk myself personally, I prefer a more um, Western container. I grew up in a Western society. I'm a Western person. Like I said, I've experienced very powerful shamanic ceremonies. But when I say that, it doesn't mean that there's if what you're drawn to is the shamanic ceremony or the Shipibo lineage is the Shipibo lineage has been doing its thing for a very long time. It doesn't mean they need to change anything they're doing. I think that like the beautiful thing about psychedelics and what I hope continues is a really rich variety of choices and experiences. So if you want to go uh, experience a psychedelic experience where everything is bright pink because that's your thing, and like and there's like whatever your thing is, as long as you do the right research to understand what you're stepping into and what it means to be in a Shipibo ceremony versus a more Western ceremony. There's things that are just not there, and there's other things that are there, and to understand what's going to make the most sense for each person. Like there's no right or wrong in any of this, but it's really about people finding something that resonates with them and is going to make the most meaningful and lasting impact in their life for what they're seeking. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to chat about this idea of is the client sick? Is there
Right.
some sort of issue in one of their systems? And then like let's bring this all the way to like drug trials. Like how do you like to think about that stuff?
Um,
And I can
well,
prompt you with more specific questions if
no, no,
that's too abstract.
no. I think that's a very interesting question. I think that the medical the on the medical model side, it's really pointing to the individual saying, you have depression and you need something to do by yourself that's going to heal your depression, right? Like,
Right.
here's your pill. And all the headlines, people love these headlines of, will mushrooms cure XYZ? Will this, it's like these panacea type, um, and humans in general love the magic pill in all forms. Like we love we love shortcuts, so it's part of our nature that we need to overcome. But what I think is missing there is like the fact that lots of people have trauma that is getting in the way of them seeing the beauty in their lives and seeing the beauty that's within them. So there is a personal journey there. There is also um, there is a broader societal health. The way we are approaching society right now is clearly unproductive, and it's clearly moving in a direction that is not conducive to well-being of individuals. So I think we need to look at like the health of our society as a whole, and I think psychedelics can help us reckon with what is happening in the world and try and find some level of peace or some sense of acceptance so that you can continue moving forward in your life. But I don't think psychedelics are about healing each person and then suddenly things are going to be better. I think we need to look at how we relate to our lives and to our communities and to humans and to nature as a much broader conversation, right? And I hope that that's what it's such a big part. Like we talked about group settings. Like I think that's a huge part of group settings, and what makes it powerful is you end up in a room with a number of people from different walks of life that when you show up, you kind of go, oh, I don't really know if I get that guy or if I understand that person. And by the end, you realize your inherent sameness, you in how much there is, how much similarity there is, and you have so much more compassion. And I think those kind of experiences are super important. So, yeah, in terms of how that connects to drug trials, I'm not sure. I just mostly think that drug trials are about one very specific thing. They're about fitting into a monetary system for delivering substances. I don't know that they're about much else. Uh,
Right. Well, how I look at it, Steve, is it's another access pathway. Like
yes.
there's only people that are ever going to go to normal
Yep. Totally.
allopathic physicians and
Yep.
normal therapists or whatever. And it's like there's a lot of those people, and there's a lot of really 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 sick people. And yes, like most people are in biotech for money, but I would hope there's people that actually care about people getting better and feeling better. And I think this like overarching theme of like deeper connectivity is kind of a natural side effect of psychedelics. So like despite their intent, well, lack of intent around that, because they purely want like, does condition turn off or on or like go away?
Yeah. Right.
Like that's
Right.
the kind
Yeah.
of thinking. It's like, well, it's more spectrumy than that, and more like there's going to be a lot more things that come up that they're not really thinking about, but the FDA doesn't, factor in big
Yeah.
mystical experiences or connective things.
Yeah. No, I get that. I think like I used to be a lot mm, more polarized about the fact that I think I get it. Like all of these paths are steps in somehow in the right direction. I think the thing I worry about the most is this, like it's already happening with ketamine, where somebody is sitting alone in a room with ketamine in their arm, and they're supposed to be having a healing experience, but they're completely alone. And
Mm-hmm.
there's very little support before or after. And um, it's just I don't think, like, to me the magic of psychedelics is actually the connection with other humans, with life itself, and
Mm-hmm.
to me in many ways psychedelics are actually almost like a trick door towards connection, towards being deeply connected with others. And so I just really hope that we can maintain a wider lens that says it's not just the psilocybin, it's also the aspects that happen around the psilocybin that make the impact. And so I do think I think there will be some benefit of medical psychedelics. Of course, there'll be some positive benefits. I hope that it doesn't strip away so much of it that it becomes, like one of the things that I think could happen is that psychedelics become medically legal, but they're so watered down by that time, they kind of come and go because they don't actually deliver the promise that people made when they were experiencing it in group settings with in natural environments with proper support and community, where there was the level of transformation. So, but I think it's all stepping stones. I think there's layers to it. I think there's lots of people trying to do it for the right reasons. I think I've been an advisor to a number and done some consulting with a few of those companies who I think are really trying to push a big rock up a really challenging hill, trying to get these drugs through FDA and whatnot. I mean, you look at what MAPS has done, or you look at what a lot of these companies have done. It's a tremendous amount of effort for the right reasons. Uh, it's just a tricky system,
I wholeheartedly agree. Yeah.
Yeah, man.
And
Yeah.
yeah, biotech is always interesting, but it's always, fraught with peril.
Well,
One
sorry, the only thing there, the last, like we've already heard this multiple times. Like friends of ours, our partners who we're doing our 5-MeO research with, they're trying to do some research. They were doing some research with psilocybin, and they were quoted $1,000 a dose for psilocybin from what was supposed to, and it was supposed to be the nonprofit pricing of psilocybin. And I think we're going to run into this. Like a lot of people use the marketing language of making these drugs accessible to all, but a lot of this patent game that's being played, and the way that biotech is designed, you spend tens and hundreds of millions of dollars to get a drug across the line, and then you charge $1,000 a pill for something that you should be able to buy for $20 or
and
$50.
here's the funny trick though. Like you spent all that money on psilocybin, and you can still buy a bag of mushrooms for pretty cheap. And
Well, that's the thing. Mushrooms are almost free right now.
so like, how about that? Like we're getting all of these, and this is a Hamilton Morris line as well. I think a couple of years ago, Bicycle Day in San Francisco. Like, what an amazing problem that we have all these venture capitalists and billionaires spending money to fund our field's data set. that we can lean on all that research to like support this kind of more grassroots community. Like I see
Uh,
it as kind of a spectrum, right? Like, you
yeah.
know, you're a therapist, you're doing this work, you're like, you know, you're charging people so much money, and then you're like, wait a second, if I did this in a slightly different way outside the clinical frame, I can help 10x the people at, you know, a fraction of the cost and be getting like great persistent results.
Yeah.
And like
Oh, I
I
really like
see it
that.
as kind of like a judo thing. Like how can we, as opposed to like let's keep complaining and whatever. Like no, let's
Yeah,
say like where is that energy going? How can we flip it to our benefit to help more people? Um,
absolutely.
mhm.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, because it's so much energy that's getting poured in right now, and wait till like GlaxoSmithKline, like all these big pharma companies start pouring resources in. Like that'll be really interesting. It's also going to be a lot for us to handle. Um, but here's another thing. Like this, I, I think a lot of the ways people talk about this space and like how things are developing is it's going to develop into one thing, like a monoculture. Like we always see it like converging on some sort of monoculture. Like I don't think we can anymore. Like we're kind of cultivating all these mystics, and I think mystics are inherently like ungovernable, and they'll do what they do, which is, you know, there's pros and cons to that. But also like this is a long conversation as part of like the history that we're playing out right now. Like,
Hmm.
you know, yes, maps will bring some stuff out. Like, yes, there will be some interesting ketamine trials. Yes, there will be interesting psilocybin trials. But like, what it, what gets implemented is not the final thing, but it will take work to keep improving things and keep
Yep.
getting things better. Because like what we're doing to psychiatric patients right now is not okay. Um, like this book, Saving Normal, I think by the guy that shared the DSM-4 project. Do you know DSM? Is that a thing in
Yeah.
Canada? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
The DS, it's psychiatric Bible in a sense. Like just the amount of things that are normal human conditions that are getting turned into clinical conditions is it's not okay, and that's stuff that we need to push back on quite aggressively. And you know, let's
100%.
let's develop a science-based psychiatry, because like the DSM shows that psychiatry and um in a lot of cases, like I fucking hate to say this out loud because I'm going to be called a quack, but in a lot of ways the way psychiatry is practiced is not based on science. Like
Yeah,
the data around gabapentin, for instance, like it's really fucking wild.
it is.
Yeah. So it's something we need to dig into, and that's why we should take our work really seriously. And you all are doing that, and I love to know that you're collaborating with researchers too. I think that's great. How are you working with researchers?
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, we decided we were actually going to try and do our own observational study. So we were going to go through a private REB or IRB, depending on which country you're in, basically the ethics review that makes sure all of your checks are in place so that your data is honest and secure and all that kind of stuff, and that your the participants in the trial are properly informed, all of that. So we were going to do all of that privately, which we attempted to go through, but it was just too complicated to do our own to get our own ethics review done. Just we needed us to create some separation, and so we connected with Emma Hapke at UHN, which is it's the biggest group of research hospitals in Canada. They're connected to University of Toronto, and Emma Hapke and a few others have started up a psychedelic research lab there, doing some really amazing work. Emma Hapke is she's a really excellent clinical psychiatrist who's really understands the work she's doing and does really meaningful work. She understands psychedelics in a really meaningful way. And so it's such a beautiful collaboration. So we were able to bring our ideas into their team, and we collaborated on the protocol. And we are now we're basically operational, collecting data with the guests that choose to opt in. So basically, if guests are coming to our retreat, they can opt into the study. We're doing some before and after quantitative looks. And for us, it was important that we weren't just looking at traditional measures of depression or stuff like that. We are using the DAS, which is depression, anxiety, and stress. Um, so we are measuring that, but we're also looking at a measure of mindfulness, which we felt like is important. So some of the meta the meta skills and metacognitions that help people improve the quality of their life or their lived experience. So we're looking at mindfulness before and after. We're looking at this. One of the surveys we're using is the brief inventory of thriving, and this really looks at, yeah, do like by their own measure, do people consider themselves to be thriving in their lives? And that felt really aligned with the work we do. And then we're also using a few other scales throughout. The other thing that we're doing, though, is collecting a lot of qualitative data. So we're recording and transcribing the prep and integration calls. So those are all, so we can actually look at, we can do some language analysis. We can look at the way people are describing themselves and their environment and their worlds before and after. I think that will be interesting. And for us, it was really important. The reason we wanted to launch the study is that when we looked at a lot of the work, like Malin's done a lot of great work that you mentioned Malin before, but there's not a lot of observational research on 5-MeO yet that has the data around what was the dosing, what was the environment, what was the what do we know about their previous psychedelic experience. And so we're trying to basically collect the most concise set of data that is um, shows full dosing, shows the length of each dose and how long it took in the ceremony, what presented in the ceremony, like all of the notes from the ceremony are collected, all of the dosing. We even have, if we want to go there for some other part of the study, we even have the music that was playing for each person's ceremony. Like we have so much information about the container. And for us, it was really like one of the core aspects of our work. The reason we wanted to do this was so that when research starts to get published around this study in particular, it will include aspects of the container. So that will get baked into the science. So it's not just talking about 5-MeO DMT, but it's also talking about the fact that this was in a multi-day environment, that breathwork was part of the experience, that sauna and cold exposure was part of the experience, that there was group therapy, that there was all these other aspects. So all of that will be part of the data set. And I think that's really important for the narrative of what psychedelics are all about. So we're really excited about it. And we're also really grateful to have UHN as a partner on this, because I think they really understand the work we're trying to do and they really understand psychedelics. They have a really beautiful perspective on all of it.
I love that.
Yeah.
I assume University Health Network or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right on. And that's cool that it's like a national group too. That's substantial, Steve. Congrats on that partnership.
Thank you.
I don't know too many other operators like yourself that have that kind of research partnership.
Yeah, well, it took a decent investment in our part. Like we paid to have the first protocols written. We had a research assistant on staff for a few months to help us basically collaborate and prep the materials for UHN. And anytime you do this, like research is slow, it's laborious, there's a lot of effort that goes into it, and I think for a lot of folks, having capacity for that kind of thing while doing this work, which is also so much energy, is hard. So I understand why not a lot of people are doing that. It's yeah, part of our ethos around serving this medicine is that we don't overwork ourselves. Like generally we do 2 ceremonies per month, and sometimes we'll squeeze in a third private one, but generally it's 2 a month, because what we find is we need the time in between to process what we've experienced, to absorb the learnings, to further develop our protocols, to be able to work on things like this research, and for energy management. So I think we're in a bit of a unique space where we actually have some capacity for these other things.
So I'm going to ask you a question that probably deserves 30 minutes as we're supposed to be wrapping up here, but like take your time on it, but and don't feel the need to go super complete here. But you mentioned earlier 5-MeO DMT being somewhat somatic. The way I have experienced 5 was in that kind of a framework with a couple people observing, and it was clear they had a somatic orientation, and I had a really interesting lower dose somatic experience for sure. So my protocol was like a metered 5-pen, where it was inhale 5 minutes, inhale again and take more of a macro at the 15.
Yeah.
Um, and it was pretty interesting. There's a lot of fascinating stuff. But how do you try to model the idea of this substance helping us access some somatic stuff in us?
Yeah. What we've seen is that this medicine accesses the nervous system in a way that perhaps no other psychedelic does. So there's a really unique quality to it. And yeah, so you're at the lower doses, there's this ability to be in the, like, you're still present for the experience, but you just start to notice the way emotion feels in the body. It can sometimes start to feel like waves in the body, and sometimes people experience uh, a temperature shift or heat in the body, or some shivering or tremoring. Like, a lot of people experience fascial trauma release. As soon as they consume the medicine, their body just starts this fine fascial trauma release, which is like, there's a somatic practice called TRE that's built around, specifically around that, right? So 5-MeO basically just opens that up. But what we find is that as you ramp up the dosing, as you get into the higher range dosing, what we're really doing is allowing the mind to be further and further offline. And so at the peak of these experiences, when vaporizing, I mean, intermuscular is another 30-minute conversation, or 5-hour conversation. But when vaporizing at the highest dose, the mind is completely offline. There is no Joe, right? There is no Steve. You completely dissolve into the experience. And what we see happen is that the nervous system opens up, the energetic body opens up, and people just start releasing. And sometimes it's very peaceful. Other times it's people just start shrieking or screaming or toning, spitting, rolling around, like convulsing, tremoring, all sorts of things. It's really a very intense physical experience. Um, and there is no experience of it, right? So the person isn't even there for those few minutes. Then, as they start to, the medicine starts to metabolize, they start to gain awareness of themselves again. They might, like, oftentimes people hear a very loud, the first thing they recognize is a very loud noise. And a moment later, they realize that they're making that noise. They're the ones making that very piercing sound. Um, but there's something about helping people through that process that is like this level of catharsis and release, and that doesn't require any type of psychological process. It doesn't require thinking through, connecting dots. Oh, this happened to me when I was 5, and that's why I'm this way and that way. Like, at the peak of this experience, there is no psychological process. It is purely an energetic process. And what we find is that with the right, because there's a whole bunch of other aspects I could talk about that are happening in those moments, but just to stay focused on this for a moment, when people have the right support to make sense of that experience, people generally come back with a deeper sense of interoception, meaning the ability to feel their body, to feel their lived experience. A lot of people talk about this, like, oh, suddenly I feel like I can breathe into my belly for the first time in years. Muscles just shift, things just release. A lot of times people's chronic pain shifts. We see these often very immediate results in people's people. A lot of people who are drinking a bottle of wine a night just stop drinking, or quit smoking, or quit vaping, or certain habits just fall away because something at a very deep, fundamental, unconscious level, or at a nervous system level, has just literally shifted or been released. And it's like, it's a very phenomenal thing to see. Like, this is just a quirky example, but we had one guy come to see us, and he had a couple family members die fairly suddenly. His brother and another family member had died fairly suddenly in his life, and he hadn't really processed that. He didn't really know what to make of that experience. But interestingly, something that emerged was like this fear of driving over large bridges. It became a phobia. Like, he literally couldn't. He would drive an hour and a half out of his way to avoid a bridge to get to one of his offices. It's kind of an interesting, and this is, like, again, a very quirky example, but after this experience, he literally it just didn't even cross his mind that that was an issue anymore. And after 2 or 3 years of that being the case, that condition was just gone. And so people have these very interesting shifts in the nervous system that is uh, I just haven't seen on other medicines. And there's a whole process of then integrating those shifts and hope like maintaining those shifts in your life, that maintaining that level of embodiment. There's a lot of practice after that, and there's a lot of work to do when the habits of the mind come back. But man, the potential for somatic shifts is just remarkable with 5-MeO.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
We have a lot more research to do.
We do.
That's what I know. And yeah, I'm very interested to dig more into 5-MeO DMT. It's obviously, the hot drug right now on the whole scene. Everybody's talking about it, and it's yeah, we'll see how it develops. I'm very hopeful. I remember Stan Groff at Oakland 2017 Maps said 5-MeO DMT is the future of psychiatry, quite boldly. I might add. I think there's a lot there. Yeah.
I think there is too. And I also, it's interesting because I work with this medicine, all of our research, we live and breathe 5-MeO DMT in our work. I also really believe that it needs to move slowly and that we need to be super careful with this substance. And I wouldn't even I think with all psychedelics, it's kind of an obvious thing to say that we should be careful, but I'm a lot more bullish about a much larger part of the population doing mushrooms than I am about people entering into the realm of 5-MeO DMT. I think there's a level of interruption to what you thought you knew about who you are and what's going on in this life. There's a level of dysregulation. There's a whole bunch of aspects of this medicine that really can't be understated, and I'd say 1 in 25 people that come to see us have deeply challenging integrations that last a few months and that are not a joke, that are really, really challenging. And, as facilitators, part of the reason we only work with a certain amount of people per year is so that we have the bandwidth for when that happens. We're on deck and we are with them through that process. We are helping them resource that, or we are supporting them directly because we kind of consider it part of our responsibility. But I also think it's the responsibility of anybody who's going to use this medicine that I'm just trying to make sure that people understand that for all the beauty and all of the incredible potential of this medicine, the higher the potential, the higher the risk. And I think you have to just keep both of those and hold both of those equally and know what you're getting into and be ready to do the work that comes along with this medicine, And I think that's true for all, I guess. Again, it's true for all, but there's something that happens when you smoke 5-MeO DMT that you cannot undo. And it is really profound. And I think there's great potential in that. But I just think it's not for everybody. And I don't think our society knows even how to talk about these things yet. We barely know how to talk about mushrooms or breath work in a rational and sort of holistic way, right? As you speak about often, and I do too. And then you get into these the laser, to me, 5-MeO DMT is the laser brain surgery, is the laser surgery of psychedelics. And it just has to be treated with that level of respect.
Right on. Well, Steve, where can people find your website?
Yeah, you can find us at enfold.org. That's enfold.org. We're on Instagram at Enfold Institute. I'm online everywhere at Steve Rio. Pretty easy to find us.
Amazing. All right, Steve. Yeah. Can't wait to do this again with you, and maybe next time in person in British Columbia.
That'd be amazing. Thanks so much, Joe. I appreciate it.